Well done, Pittsburgh. Mr. Freeland entered the military service not so much to fight for his country, but to advance himself and to stop fascists and take over Europe. Mr. Wendell, even as a young man, Mr. Freeland, even as a young man, was contemplative and intellectual, and therefore had difficulty adjusting to Army life, especially the racism that pervaded in the Army at that time, as the article in Powell mentioned earlier. Mr. Freeland was a lieutenant, a bombardier, on a B-25 in the 477th Bomber Group. Many people think of the Tuskegee Airmen as bold fighter pilots who dominated the Luftwaffe over Germany, which is true, like they were portrayed in the movie Red Tails. But not many people know about the other actions of the airmen, such as what happened in Freeman Field. Despite his rank, Mr. Freeland remained a second-class citizen while in the Army. He was arrested twice for defying the Army's strict segregation policies. The second arrest occurred at Freeman Field, Indiana, when Mr. Freeland and other black officers entered the all-white officers club and waited to be served. When Mr. Freeland refused to sign, read, or even acknowledge the regulations strictly separating white and black officers, he was charged with mutiny, a crime punishable by execution. Army Chief of Staff George Marshall eventually ordered the charges to be dropped for most of the men, including Mr. Freeland. But the Freeman Field mutiny was an early blow against official segregation in the armed forces, an important step in the civil rights movement. Later, the military became the first major U.S. institution to become integrated under the orders of President Truman. Of course, upon leaving the Army, Mr. Freeland pursued a career in law and has had an esteemed practice, or he practices here in Pittsburgh. So please join me in welcoming a true American hero, Mr. Wendell Freeland.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have a few comments to make before I begin my formal statement, which is not going to be very formal. This is my right hand, this is my left hand. In other words, this is right, and this is left. When Paula called me, or when I called Paula at about 2:15 this afternoon, she gave me directions again to where I was going. So I came up to Myron and made a left. We went up, past School A, School B, School C, went into the valet parking at Presby because I used to be a member of the board at Presby. I always parked there and they parked my car. And I called Ben Conford, who works with Paul, and who knows as much about Oakland as I do. So he kept telling me which way to go, and I kept going. He told me really to go to Scaife Hall, which I couldn't find. And as you all know, with the one way here and the one way there, it took me a while until finally I said, Ben, meet me at the valet parking. So then Ben had one of these machines like a telephone, which showed us how to get here. Now, of course, if anyone had told me this is where the UPMC Board of Directors used to be, I could have told them I know this place. Okay, now let me talk a little bit about it. I think my subject is the way things work. And for all of you, no matter how, for you were white, for your grandparents, most often for your parents, you have no recollection of a time like that, or they would not have had a recollection. In 1941, incidentally, I chose this day, which is January 31, for two reasons. One, my alternative was the 28th of February. You would be so tired of listening to Negro history by then, you wouldn't want to hear me. So, the second reason was that it's the day after Franklin Delano Roosevelt's birthday. January 30th. January 31. In any event, most people have forgotten Franklin Delano Roosevelt. His name is mentioned several times. This was in the Obama inauguration speeches. But he was the President of the United States. He begun his third term in 1940. The president before him never had a third term, nor can a president in the future have a third term. He was a Democrat. My family was, as most Negroes were in the early 30s, Republican. So I was Republican, but I talked to someone, a history prof at Morgan College, then is now Morgan University, and told me, he asked me what I felt about this, that, and the other. And at 11 years old, I told him, because I was 11 at the time, and he said, well, I was a socialist. Well, I wasn't completely a socialist, but I was as close to a socialist as 11-year-old could get. So probably that's a part of the background he gave, that I was a little bit to the left of the center. I was a little bit to the left of anybody here, I'm sure. I still am. Some people don't do it. Anyway, we were just coming out of a depression. Historians will tell us that the depression was not over until we entered the war. And perhaps that is accurate. But for many of us, by 1936, with the various New Deal programs that weren't killed, certainly by 1938, when the Wagner Act was approved, which allowed unions to organize, steelworkers and others came into existence. Until then, we felt at that time, in 38 from it, that we were out of the Depression. We really weren't until World War II. At that time, I lived in Baltimore. I was born there. And at that time, everything was segregated. I never had a white schoolmate. I never had a white teacher. I never had a white principal. I didn't even have a white superintendent, because there was the superintendent of the colored schools in Baltimore City. So I went to Henry Highland Garnet Elementary School. For those who want to read about university, you can pick up on Henry Highland Garnet in the books. Booker T. Washington Junior High School and Frederick Douglass High School. I was lucky enough to win a scholarship to Howard University, and I went there. I suppose the only white people on the campus then were communists who were trying to proselytize the Negroes who were there. I must point out to you that I'm going to use the term Negro, for that was the terms that were used in those days about us. It was either Negro or colored. There was intellectual battle between people like Schuyler and Cullinan over which we should be called. But anyway, I'm going to use the term Negro when I talk about those days, because I find it difficult to talk about black when I'm really talking about my existence as a Negro. I went to Howard and took ROTC, took history and political science and all those kinds of things, and probably met a few white people at the time. And I still lived in a completely segregated society. You have to remember, in Washington, D.C., you could go to offices of the government, and there was no discrimination. You could walk in. But if you went to 12th and Constitution Avenue, and got in a bus to go to Virginia, you had to sit in the back, because that's where discrimination began. At the Union Station, which is still there, much more beautiful than it was in 1941, there was, if you got a train to go south, you got in the first train, maybe half of the car, which was behind the coal-burning engine. You know, you've all heard stories about Negroes eating bananas and fried chicken. Well, they carried their own lunch, because they weren't allowed in the dining cars. And then they were dirty. Of course you're dirty when you're right behind the engine when you get off the train. But if you bought a ticket in New Haven, Boston, or New New York, or Baltimore, to go south of Washington, D.C., you were assigned to car 23B. Now, later on, I skipped the point here to tell you how things were those days. Later on, when I was married, and just before I got married, my wife recognized my complexion was different from hers, and was very white. So I would go down to the train station, and I would buy the ticket for her and for me. And we would go into the segregated white section of the choo-choo train, and go down to the class where we married and other places from time to time. But that's the way things were. The 12th Constitution, it stopped being, quote, as far as transportation is concerned, an integrated entity. Mind you, nothing else was integrated. The YMCA, the YWCA, the police force, everything was completely segregated. The YW did begin some movement in the 40s, but the YMCA was backwards then as it is now. Anyway, it was this kind of world in which World War II began. And Hitler was not just against Jews. He was against blacks. He was against everybody except Aryans. And therefore, while I was at Howard, I developed hatred for fascism and Nazis. I believed that they had to be overturned. And I believed also that many people then did not believe that Hitler would not stop at England, or stop as if he conquered England, but would come to the United States, and come to us. We'd be worse off than we were under the democratic government we had. Anyway, those are my views about our country. And I just saw Higginbotham and heard him. He's a young Higginbotham. The older is Mitch, who was a pilot. 25, and I flew with Mitch. Mitch now lives in California. I was listening to say my first name, joke, I can't remember. Anyway, I couldn't even drive a car. Mitch and his brother and all the guys from Sewickley wanted to fly. There were Negroes all over the country who wanted to fly. All I wanted to do was walk down the street, get on a bus, a streetcar, and get from place to place. There was never a car in my family, and therefore I had no idea about driving cars, and certainly not about flying. I went into the Army, that was rapid. I went in 1943, and as your colleague who introduced me said, I did not go in because of love of country and because I wanted to fly. I went in because I was drafted, and when I got there, I wanted to be as good as I could be. I wanted to advance as far as I could advance. In other words, it was Wendell Freeland against the military services of the United States. They won, but it took me a long time. So I went, now I tell you more about the speaking experience, beginning with how I got there. Well, I got there. Before that, I went to Camp Lee, Virginia, which was the reception center for Negroes and whites. I never knew whites in those days. And I went to Camp Lee. And the first question the sergeant asked me was, what was my serial number? This was a basic test. I said 33735 I'd only had that for a couple of weeks. So he figured I was a genius. He had to send me to a lieutenant. Of course, I must tell you the sergeant was white and the lieutenant. So the lieutenant said to me, well, you know, yeah. How far did you go to school until I was in college? Well, it's we have a program. Mine. Maybe you want to be interested in that. Well, I said, everybody I know, Howard went into the Air Force, the Army Air Force, at that time went to Peaceville, Mississippi. Now, I did not believe Mississippi existed. Now, As a matter of fact, just an example of how Mississippi was in those days. It's pretty bad now. In those days, you could not even teach the Bill of Rights. That was not allowed to be taught. And of course, it was really the end of the world. Oh, I knew about the Mississippi men who were in the Congress of the United States, in senior positions, because they were then Democrats. They were becoming Republicans after this Voting Rights Act of '65. But the point is that I knew Bilbo, I knew Rankin, I knew these men. And Mordecai Johnson, who was the president of Harvard University, used to say that, and he still got money from the federal government, because Howard was a federally financed institution. But he would say he didn't know what it was like in Russia, but he didn't know what it was like in Mississippi. And he would still go before Bilbo and Rankin and get money for college. But anyway, this lieutenant said, "Oh no, Freeland, you have a place in New Jersey, a place in Massachusetts, a place in Michigan." So I said, "Okay, maybe I'll sign it." Well, I wasn't 19. I had to be 19 to be in the program. So I had to send a note to my mother in Baltimore. I suppose I sent it to my father too, and she signed. And to allow me to tell them that I would be 19, February 21, 19, whatever it was, 43, or 44. And therefore I could get into the program. So I knew then that I was going to be into a flying program as described by the lieutenant. I still thought I could get to New Jersey, New England, Michigan. We got one Friday afternoon. It was the first Friday afternoon that I could possibly have gotten leave to go, weekend leave to the Baltimore. I was already all packed up in the Baltimore to see my parents. And somebody came around and said, "Packing up clothes, you're leaving." I was already packed. And I did not go to Baltimore. I got on a train that had a Norfolk and Western ending. We headed west into the sun for a short while, made a left turn, and did not stop until we got to this goddamn city. So there I was. First sign I saw, stop, look, and listen, Mississippi law. Now that just shows you the difference between the South in those days and the North in those days. In the North, this is stop, look, and listen. But in Mississippi, they had to tell you Mississippi law. So I went to Keystone, Mississippi. Again, completely segregated. And met many of the other young men who were there. We took various tests, psychiatric examination, be in bed after you were 3, things like that. And I passed all of that. And then they had a written exam, which was very, very difficult. It's like all exams. For all of you who are going to take exams, whether it's the School of Public Health, School of Life, the first part of the exam, rush through, don't worry about answering the question. Because the last part of the exam is going to be comprehension. If you're still alive, that's where the real test is going to be. So, in spite of the fact that I didn't even take algebra, advanced algebra in high school, the first 6 questions on trigonometry were the first function. I'd learned that from one of my colleagues. So I got to trigonometry, and this guy with a master's degree in mathematics didn't get to the algebra. But that's because I learned how to take exams. And I still take an exam, not the bar exam again. Anyway, there I was in Mississippi, took all the tests, and said, "Okay, you're going to Tuskegee." I have to tell you one lucky thing about my life in the military. There were very few things that were. But on a given afternoon, we were told to pack up. We were going on a trip and pack our tents because we were intending to sleep overnight at the place where we marched. Well, I packed up all my stuff, rather poorly, I'm sure, had my tent, and got out to the ground where we were supposed to spend the night. And just as I was putting my tent up to sleep the night, it was called, they want you to go leave for Tuskegee. So I didn't have to sleep overnight, and that was the end of my basic training. So off I went to Tuskegee. Well, Tuskegee was an institute at that time. It was famous for George Washington Carver, and it was founded by Booker T. Washington. And it was, to me, from Howard University, which was the capstone of Negro education, Tuskegee was the backwater. It's probably like seeing people from Pittsburgh or Slippery Rock, I don't know. But, maybe not Slippery Rock, maybe Alderdice High School. Anyway, I went there and they had these emeries, these were dormitories. I call them dormitories. They call them emeries. And we were supposed to take a college training attachment program, by which the Air Force taught us, was supposed to teach us 2 years of college, 5 years. Well, by this time, I have to bring you up to date, not about my own experience, but the corresponding experience of the men who were in Red Ball, the Red Tails, and the like. They learned to fly. They went to Tuskegee, they were training at Tuskegee, they took basic training, they took pre-flight training at Tuskegee, they took basic training at Tuskegee, they took advanced training at Tuskegee, and they took advanced training when they were officers with P-40s at Tuskegee Air Force Base, which was next to Tuskegee Institute. And it was chosen because there had been a civil air patrol outfit at Tuskegee Institute. And this was just adjoining it. As a matter of fact, basic training, basic first flights and basic flights were handled by CAP people who were Negro. There have been so many people like Higginbottom who wanted to fly, and not like this, like Roscoe Brown, and the colonel who was on here, his name I forget, he just recently died, who wanted to fly. They always wanted to fly. They've been making little planes, I suppose, flying into the air, and saying, this is what I'm going to do when I grow up. Well, we had so many Negroes who could fly, but they had enough for the fighter group, which was made up of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, the 100th Pursuit Squadron, and the 331st became the 337th fighter group. And they had enough to replace them. And they had fighter trainees, pilot trainees, just going through training, no place to put them. So they decided, well, maybe Negroes can fly. Now, maybe you didn't know it, but there was a presumption that Negroes could not fly. And this was before World War II, before Tuskegee. But that presumption was in the air. And then some people believed, okay, maybe they can fly better at night because they can see like cats. And so maybe they can fly. These are things, Paula, you don't know these old stories. I tell you, you're not old enough. But that was the way it was. So when they had so many people who could fly, they said, well, we'll start a bomber group. And therefore they needed fighter bombers, bomber pilots. But that was easily transferable in those days. Bombardiers and navigators. Well, when I got to Tuskegee, I was told that I have a high strain line in bombardiering and navigating. Well, I'm not so sure I could get a high strain line in navigating, because you notice my right hand and my left hand. But evidently I did. And even now, some 60-some years later, I still don't know what a strain line is. But at least it was a score that was high enough. So I went to the college training attachment class in one day, and I went to the second day. And the guy said, the professor said, okay, I'm going to teach you all you need to know about the bombing function. Now, the bombing function is a tangent function of trigonometry. Plane is here, ground is there, that's altitude. The target is here, that's the hypotenuse. Now, if you can see, I did know about hypotenuse because I learned that in the Greek. Anyway, the point was that that's all. I only went to school for 2 days. So then they had what they called an orientation flight, Piper Cubs, at the Tuskegee Institute, at CAP field. And there, I learned to get into the Piper Cub, and the instructor said, okay, it's all yours. And we were going down the cornfield, which was the airfield. I didn't know, I didn't know what to do. I pulled back. Fortunately, he had his hand on the controls when we got up in the air. So when we landed, he said to me, now, we're going to go around here, back to the hangar. But don't hit these things, they're rudders. They're not brakes. You know, because most people would just hit the brake, but that was a rudder which would make the plane spin off on the right. Lo and behold, I told him, well, I never drove a car, so I know what a brake is. Anyway, so I did learn what a rudder was. I took the 10 lessons there, and then went to Tuskegee Air Force Base. Again, completely segregated. All of the command was white. Neil Parrish was the colonel who was in charge of Tuskegee Air Force Base. Now I must tell you, in earlier statements I've made to the Department of Interior, someday Department of Interior, I was critical of Neil Parrish. I said, because I only served as an officer at Tuskegee many years later, 2 years later, but it seemed like many years later. And we had a party every week at the officers' club. My dues for the club and for lunch and dinner were nil. We got a $30 allotment each month for food, clubs, and things like that. But my bill was only about $3.44 a month. So I considered that later to be a method for keeping us happy. And I didn't want to be happy. Because, you see, if we were happy with the situation, whatever it was, we would never try to change things. And so that's some advice for the young people. Just don't get happy. Don't let people make you too happy. Because then you're not going to pass most of the tests. Anyway, I've learned since then by many conversations with people like Roscoe Brown, who's one of the leaders of the Tuskegee Airmen, and president of the Community College in New York. Parrish was from Kentucky. But he committed himself making people good pilots. And he, Roscoe Brown, and others, commend him in writing otherwise, and how he fought for the Tuskegee, people at Tuskegee, because the command, the overall command of the Air Force, the Army, except for George Captain Washington, who was the chief of staff, the command was made up of men who were trained, again they're trained just after World War I, and who were told that the Negro was inferior. It was a study in 1925 that made that fairly clear to men, and they learned that at the war college. So then when the war began, they were colonels, generals, 4-star generals, or maybe 3-star generals. And they, like Mark Clark from South Carolina, were running things. And therefore, there were many, many misconceptions about blacks at the very high level. Not at Marshall's level, not at the War Department's level, but at the level of senior officers. So, there were many times, Roscoe John said, that parish had to fight them to ensure that then our men would get, his men would get through the program and take it really far. So I went to Tuskegee Air Base. We had pre-flight training. We learned Morse code. We learned things that you never thought you could learn. For instance, aircraft identification. We would have a Messerschmitt 109 at 1,000 feet away traveling at so many miles an hour. And you could happen to be flashing the screen. So I learned that my eyes really don't see. So my brain, and I could remember that. I learned these things. After leaving, after pre-flight, which was I think 6 weeks, doesn't really matter. And I'm going to get to my most important experience as a leader. We went to Tyndall Field Base in Florida, Panama City, Florida, to prepare the gunnery. All bombardiers and navigators have gunners. And this is the second break I got in gunnery school. One of the things we had to do was assemble, disassemble and assemble a 50 caliber machine gun blindfolded with gloves on. Well, in 2 minutes. So I did it. In fact, I said, "You finished?" "Yeah." Took the blindfold off. Touched him once and it fell apart. So he probably would have flunked me out then, but he didn't. And I did it the next time. It was a couple of times I finally got it. So we finished gunnery school. And at gunnery school we had problems. Because at Tuskegee, there was one little movie, 15 cents. And everybody who went to the movie were Negroes. I don't know where the white officers were, but they didn't come to this little movie. And when we got to Tyndall Field, Florida, we went to the theater to see a picture, and they had, Negroes had to sit upstairs. Well, my group refused to do that. And we said, no, it has to be open. So what they did was banned all gunnery trainees from going to the theater. And we got the reels afterwards for the movies, and we saw them in the hangar. That had to apply to white gunnery people too, and for sure they were familiar with us. Anyway, finished that, we went back to Tuskegee. Everybody had to go back to Tuskegee. It was the beginning and the end of the world in these days. So back at Tuskegee, I was told, okay, as were 38 of us, you're going to Hondo Field, Texas, which is near San Antonio. And in Hondo, you will go to navigation school. So, I went to navigation school. We were already 2 weeks behind. We used to scrub our floors at 1 o'clock in the darkness, just so we would be clean the next morning when we came to check. And finally they decided they had too many Negroes. 38 too many Negroes. They had to have 25 only. So they sent 13 of us back to Tuskegee. 13 of us went back to Tuskegee. It's not because I didn't know my right hand from my left hand, but because we were the junior people in terms of service. That's the decision we made, reason for the decision. So back we went to Tuskegee. I have to tell you one thing about the trip. 2 things about the trip. One was when we got to San Antonio. Tuskegee was dry. So we went to the liquor stores in Texas and got all of this liquor. If you want to take back to Tuskegee, the worst liquor it was, the worst was private stock. Guaranteed to be less than 30 days, colored in wood chips. That was on the label. It may have cost $1.99. But we were going to take this back on the train. Well, we had reservations on the Pullman reservations, first class reservations on the train that's coming through. When we tried to get on the Pullman car, we were rejected. Pete Hewlett became a physician in New York, and Pete was sort of in charge of this. I said, no, we have orders for first-class accommodations, and we're not going to leave. He would put us up in cars to be free, 23B. And we're not going to leave, this train will not leave here until we get accommodations. So we got accommodations, 2 and 1, 2 guys downstairs, 1 guy upstairs. And then we got to New Orleans, and we drank a little bit on the way. But one of the things, the problem was that we were a civilian train. And the military trains came all across Texas, going to New Orleans and other places. And we had to be on the siding while they were going. So the trip was much longer. By the time we got to New Orleans, we were drinking in private stock. So we didn't make any money at all at Tuskegee. Well, I know I'm boring you, but this story I've told so many times. I don't know where to cut off little bits and pieces because it's a very important part of my life. So I apologize if I go over Paul's limit, which I didn't know because I don't have a watch. But anyway, what happened then, we go to Tuskegee, and we're pretty pissed off because now we feel we'll not make it. We'll not get our wings. We had gunners' wings, but we didn't want to be gunners because we'd still be enlisted then. So what happened was, eventually they said, okay, you guys go to Midland Air Base, from whence George Bush came. That's the younger Bush, Mad Bush. And so we went to gunnery bombarding school there. And we learned how to bomb. We had Norton bomb sight. And we used to go around like this all the time. Because your right eye is down in the sight, and there are 2 wheels here that you turn around. It was probably one of the very first computers. And it was so secret that earlier on in the war, bombardiers carried sidearms to protect them. And if a plane went down, a bombing plane went down, that was the first thing that was to be destroyed. Because it focused on the target. You put all of your information into, you put your basic information you got from weather and from the ground, telling you what your altitude would be and so forth and so on. You converted that to true altitude, then you converted it to ground speed after you brought in wind. And then you just followed the snare gun thing from the initial point, which is when the bombardier took the plane over. And he ran the plane, the pilot didn't. It's like automatic pilot, except the bombardier was automatic. I won't say automaton, but anyway. I finished there, and finally didn't go back to Tuskegee. Went to Godman Field, Kentucky. And this is where the crux of my story as a civil rights person begins. First of all, that was a part of civil rights, because we were fighting, as the Negro Press said, we were fighting discrimination here. We had double V's, be at home and be overseas. That was the symbol. And when I got to Godman Field, I went to the BOQ, National Officers Quarters, pulled my stuff down, all that kind of crap. And Godman Field was right across the highway in Fort Knox, which was a permanent base. And that's where they kept all their gold. They still may have $2 worth. And the White Command, because we had White Command, headed by Robert Selway, Colonel, made a deal with the people in Fort Knox. The command, all of the command was white. Mind you, it didn't matter. Every single one was white. From the colonel on down to a second lieutenant. Every single one. They went to the Fort Knox Officers Club. They lived at Fort Knox. They swam at Fort Knox. They drank at Fort Knox. We were at BOQ, the BOQs at Godman's Field, the Negro officers. We had an officers club about the size of this room. Most of us didn't know what an officers club looked like anyway. But we had a pool table, a poker table, and a bar. Now, of course, we were drinking then, because I suppose the age of drinking was about 10. Anyway, the 477 Bombardment Group, which was the group I became attached to, was transferred from Godman Field to Freeman Field, Indiana. I was in a replacement group, and there were several of my former upperclassmen at Howard who were there, some of whom were ground officers. And we used to sit and talk. We learned that when the 477 went to Godman Field, went to Freeman Field, Indiana, that the command had set up separate clubs, separate BOQs, separate everything. Now, at that time, the Army regulations, which had been passed, approved long before World War II, and therefore there were very few Negro officers, provided that there should be no discrimination among officers by reason of race, creed, or color. So, relying upon that, we decided, as a group, that we could fight the principle that the command had established at Freeman Field. We decided upon a course of action. We got to Freeman Field, Indiana, probably washed up, at least now I have to talk about myself. Dressed, we went to vote the White House. I was greeted by a night colonel who said, "Don't go in." I said, "Thank you, sir." And I went into the foyer. I'd never been in anything like an officer's club. I'd never been in a foyer before. And there I was, and I read a Newsweek magazine. I remember that specifically because I was a Time reader, Time magazine reader, and Newsweek was even second rate, or I didn't know it. And there we were. I sat there for about 5 minutes, established a beach in it, and I'd been in. And I left, saw the colonel again. He said, "Consider yourself under arrest orders." In other words, as an officer, I was not immediately put into the jail, guardhouse. I was under restriction to my quarters. 69 of us did that night, the first night. If any of you read about things who get confused about who was there were 2 arrests. One was going into the club, coming out of it. And we were there for about 6 or 7 days under arrest, restricted to our quarters. And because Washington was concerned about this, they gave Selway the order to release us. Selway, not us. He did. We were released. Then we were called into a large hangar. And we were all told that there were certain base regulations. These base regulations provided that certain facilities were for trainee personnel. Certain facilities were for instructor personnel. Trainee personnel even included Negro slave ships. So really, it was just another way of saying white and black. And we were supposed to sign at the bottom saying, "I read and understood this." Well, there were questions from the group. What did we write? I read it, but I don't understand it. What did I write? I read it, but I disagree with it. Oh, that's okay, just write it down. Just write it. So many of the men there did. 101 of us didn't. And what happened was, one afternoon, we were told to go to command headquarters. Now, I tell you this because it's personal and because it was not a mutiny. It's a mutiny now in the history, but it wasn't a mutiny because you had to say I. You could not say we, because that would be mutiny, and that would be punishable by death, as what court-martial which we were subject. But anyway, I went in, and I stood before a group of officers who were up high. 4 of them were white. One was a black quartermaster, usually was the little shade, and he was just there for show. And I fear, saluted to who I was, and they asked me to sign the document, but I didn't sign it. So then they read me the article of war that said that failure to obey a direct order by your commanding officer is punishable by death or such other punishment as court-martial may direct. We were 19 or 20, I think it was 20. It's kind of frightening to talk about death and death or such other punishment as court-martial may direct. So then my immediate commanding officer, who was white, of course, Anthony M. Chapman, who was from New Jersey, said, I, Anthony M. Chapman, order you to sign. And I remained mute. Most people did not believe that I could be mute. And witness today from your own listener. I remained mute. Consider yourself under arrest of orders. Again. And there were 101 of us at that time who didn't sign the document. We were under arrest, and one day we were called out, back enough clothes for 2 weeks. That was all the clothes we had, really. They put those in the barracks, in the bags, and for formation, there was a command car. In front of the command car was Neil, was Robert Sullivan. Now, I remember him in jodhpurs. Now, probably he didn't have jodhpurs, but he seemed to be such a rotten son of a bitch to me then. And he was. He said, you failed your command in your country. And blah, 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 blah. And I think he had a writing problem in his hand. That's my recollection. I'm an old man. It was my recollection in 1952, 51, 52, all of that time, but maybe it was a recollection of something from time. But we were then carted into two transport planes and carted back, flown back to the Freeman Field, the Gardner Field, Kentucky. There we were backing up BOQs with armed guards around us and lights on us at night. And we remained there again until Washington, D.C. The recollection of the Assistant Secretary of War Floyd, who did the study, and who ordered us released. And what they did, how they did it, was interesting. Most of us knew that they would never have 2 colonels in the Air Force at the same time, 2 Negro colonels. But B.O. Davis was in Europe. At this time, the war had wound down, was winding down. So they brought B.O. Davis back to the United States. B.O. Davis back to the United States to be the commanding officer, commanding colonel of the 477th Mixed Group, bombardment and fighter planes. But the command, the white command, was out. We had won our battle. And thereafter, as your colleague stated, the Truman, impressed by the valor of the men in Italy, Africa, over the German skies, 332nd. And because of our, what historians now call an original sit-in, we never I just call it the establishment beach here. But we had won. The world had changed as far as the military was concerned. The military still is far advanced than the rest of the country in terms of non-discrimination and opportunities for everybody. I think I've told you my story. Thank you very much for your patience. I watched your faces. looked very carefully at some people whom I know and worried about whether they were sleeping. And you didn't fall asleep. But you didn't fall asleep. I watched you carefully. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Freeland. Our dean is also a pilot.
He is a pilot. I'm not a pilot. Good seeing you. I would never have been a fighter pilot. Those guys are crazy. Are you a fighter pilot?
No.
Okay, good.
Well, thank you so much for enlightening, historic, fascinating presentation. You've led a marvelous life, and we thank you for being with us. I would like to give you a small token.
Thank you very much. Somebody went to buy me a bow tie.
And you're very perceptive.
I accept it. But thanks. Thank you.
If you don't mind, we probably have a few people that have questions for you.
I can look at the plaque and see I didn't talk together.
None.
I didn't see the plaque before. It might have intimidated me.
Laura?
Thank you for your whole life, Wendell.
Lauren, thank you for saying that.
Wendell, who conceived of and really truly started the program?
Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was, well, yeah, most of you know, or should know. She was the conscience of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. She was more liberal than he. She went in the coal mines. She scared the right-wingers to death. And she felt, you see, the Negro press, Pittsburgh Courier, which was then a real substantial newspaper, the Afro-American, the Norfolk Journal, the Atlantic, these newspapers came up with the idea because of having Negroes every branch of the service. You see, still talking about the Army. In the Navy, there was nothing except messmen. And then Dory Miller, the guy at Pearl Harbor, was a messman. So when somebody was coming in shooting at him, he had a weapon to shoot at them. He found a weapon. In the Army, it was the same way. There was right command with every outfit in the Army. And so, the press was constantly battering the War Department and Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt carried the ball. Now I should point out that the program began before B.O. Davis was a part of it. He had been a graduate, he was a graduate of West Point. He was there for 4 years and nobody spoke to him. Nobody. His father was a general inspector general. When B.O. Davis came, he wanted to fly, but they wouldn't let him fly. So he went to Tuskegee, and he legitimized, in my view, the Tuskegee experience. Mind you, I don't call it the Tuskegee experiment, because that's something you and public health is quite good about. And I think that those are the forces. If one person could, one person would be involved with the others.
Other question?
Yes, Mr. Freeland, it's an honor to meet you. I have a question. Of all of the different movies that have been produced about the Tuskegee Airmen, which of those movies do you think best portrays your actual life experience of the men, or what you say is combinations of both? I've seen many movies, of course, the latest being Red Tails, and just wanted to know which of those movies did you think best portrayed your actual experience?
Well, I suppose some of them did not portray actual experiences, therefore I reject them.
Okay.
Red Tails does, in fact, portray actual experience. George Lucas did it. He had finished it, but he couldn't get it produced. He couldn't get it in the theaters. He had to guarantee Fox $20 million. And finally got it distributed. It has more of the substance of it, in my opinion, even though it's flying around and doing all that. Because what it showed was that Negroes had the worst planes that were still in the Air Force, still active, the B-40. If you touched the rudder of the B-40, it would fall off. It was a bad plane. It was made famous by the, China and the Flying Tigers, but it was a bad plane. Just to tell you, they switched to the 51. They were allowed to fly at 51. And the 51 is probably the most perfect plane ever made. And it was made, and then they could fly with them deep into Germany, and they did. And their heroism is adequately set forth there. The people who are the officers are more directly, I can't tell you about the guy that killed, are more reflective of the actual people. The others were, in fact, Lucas has done 2 other films, or he wants to do 2 others, which would include the experience before 332nd and the experience in the Freeman Field. But I think the Red Tails, it's the only one that gets me excited. There was another one I saw.
Yeah, the other one with, was it Lawrence Fishburne? I think it was an HBO
Yeah, it was
documentary.
It was kind of funny because the hero of that was from Ottumwa, Iowa. The reason, and it's kind of funny, things, you see, we live in a small world. One of my friends was Robert Williams, who was on Bilko and some other movies. And he was a consultant for, he was a pilot. And he's from Ottumwa, Iowa. So he made the hero, no, he wasn't the hero in the movie, he was just a consultant from Ottumwa, Iowa. Fishburne was, I don't know. Red Tails impressed me much. Even though I don't like those flying upside down or whatever.
Another question? Dan, you have a question?
Yeah, that was, thank you very much for your comments and for your service. I found your comment near the end interesting, and I'd like to maybe reflect on it a little bit. You talked about the progressive nature of the military and its support of individuals' rights and human rights, and it reminds me of a comment during the Gulf War where Colin Powell, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was cornered by the press to say there's an disproportionate number of black people that are serving for America's war right now. And he says, I wouldn't take that as a negative, I'd take that as a positive, a compliment, that the military can give these soldiers opportunities that they don't even have in the civilian world.
Well, you see so many people who advanced in the military and come out, advanced in the civilian world. It is true that there are many more Negroes, many more blacks. I suppose disproportionate number. That's because they're poor. That's because they have no jobs out here in civilian life. And clearly, you're talking about the chief of staff. Who is he? Black man. You talk about, I went to a party for Secretary Bolton in somebody's administration. I was representing the National Order of Nuclear. And there were so many Negro generals I almost dropped dead. I was shocked. A Negro general? It's almost as bad, for me, it was almost as bad as a Negro president, or as good as a Negro president. Something I didn't believe could happen. Just as I said, I couldn't believe that there'd be 2 colonels, 2 Negro colonels in World War II. I couldn't believe there'd be a gentleman in the chief of staff. And the opportunities have been there for men and women in the military, and Negroes have taken advantage of it. many of them are taking advantage of it, not just the people who come out as colonels or something like that to get jobs in industry, but with other skills. You know, we still have a job of getting veterans jobs. They do fairly well. Fairly well. Veterans have been, and the opportunity for advancement is better than civilian life.
Mr. Freeland? Mario Brown. I have the honor of working with Paula and with Ben, and want to thank you for coming today and sharing your experience. And it was a good segue. You mentioned having a Negro president, and while watching the inauguration, I saw some of your colleagues come into the booth